Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off today again with some satellite data, just as the sun was rising here in parts of the central United States, I'd like to just rewind the clock back to yesterday and show you a couple of important things. First of all, we're going to zoom in on a couple of these areas, but before I do that, I want you to notice that the setup for the weather pattern coming in the next few days, which is going to feature flooding rains through parts of the Mid-South getting to the Ohio River Valley, a risk of severe storms today coming out of Texas into the Red River Valley of the South, and then the risk of severe storms. In fact, there's a moderate risk for severe storms tomorrow over the lower Mississippi River Valley. We can actually see the setup right now. Do you notice it down here? If you look down in Texas and Louisiana, you're going to notice that the winds are coming out of the south like this, while above it, the higher level clouds are getting blown off in this direction. And this is just an indication of the moisture that's setting up in the low levels, plus the shear, which will be needed to produce these strong to severe storms. And that's going to be a big component of what's going to have to happen here over the next couple of days to see the severe weather setup really kind of show itself. Also, we can see, it's kind of hard to notice here, but with the very strong winds yesterday out of New Mexico into Texas and Oklahoma, there was another dust storm that was underneath some of these clouds. But I'd like to zoom in on a couple of areas, and the first one I'm going to take you to is in California. I'm sure many of you saw in the news yesterday that deep coastal low that went through parts of the San Francisco Bay continued to slide farther to the south. And you can see some of the deep convection, big thunderstorms that happened in California yesterday. And one of these storms down here near Los Angeles actually produced a tornado being investigated today to see how much damage it did. Just incredible to see the strength of these storm systems coming into California. And in a moment, we're going to talk about the next view that we're expecting to go through here. But once again, in today's report, I kind of highlight the risk we have on some of the spring flooding due to snowmelt. And I wanted to give you a perspective here coming out of the Canadian Prairie down into the northern plains and upper Midwest on what the snowpack looks like. So if I move this, you can see that where the cloud is versus where the snow is located. And again, we've been talking about how there's 2 to 10 inches of liquid in this snow right here, which we need to be paying attention to the pace at which this melts. Because that is going to ultimately determine how quickly the spring flooding happens and then ends, and what it might mean in terms of prevented plant acres in the northern part of the United States and Canadian Prairie because of this. So there's just an extensive snowpack this year. Speaking of snowpack, I want to give you the latest data from NRCS on the west. It is important to note here that we're still looking at values in the 200 to 400% range across parts of California. The upper Colorado Basin really quickly here is right now at its highest level in the last 10 years at 144% of the average, and we actually expect more snow coming into this area. So again, this would be right into this area. But I do want you to, if you get a chance to read the report today, take note of us going through the hydromet data for the Pacific Northwest, looking at the reservoirs, which in many locations are quite low, meaning that this snowpack is critical right now for when that does melt this spring to filling up some of those reservoirs. So overall, we'll look back at this winter and see, good snowpack throughout the West, but I want you to understand that there are still a few places that have some longstanding water issues, especially in the Pacific Northwest, we're going to have to keep an eye on. Now, if we come back to this narrative of when will this all melt, I want to show you the jet stream pattern. And I'm just going to play this, okay? And what we're going to be watching for here is any sense of sustained ridging in this area. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this area specifically is because to bring in a lot of warm air into this area right now would then start to promote that early melt. And what you see is the opposite of this. It's going to be a highly volatile temperature pattern. There are multiple deep troughs cutting into the western United States. These are going to continue to support more snow, like this one here next Wednesday coming into California. The systems are going to do like they've been doing, which is to kind of lift around what will be kind of a rebounding subtropical southeastern ridge. But this is just going to keep the pattern very active. And what it does to the temperatures is seen right here. So this is a 5-day sliding, a 5-day average, a sliding window over the next 15 days. That's what we normally look at here. So you notice that throughout the Canadian Prairie and the northern plains in the west, we stay anchored with cold, but we get these kind of pulses of warmer air each time we get a bit of a ridging event that happens in this area. So there's one that's happening now, okay, and then we expect the colder air to come in to finish the month, and then we see that the first week of April has another push of warmer weather from Texas through the mid-south and southeast. But we don't break away to a full warm pattern until we can get rid of the deeper troughs that are in the west and the broader troughing that's happening over the northern plains and Canadian Prairie of the United States. So that's going to continue to be the discussion as we go forward. Now, I do want to point out that with this pattern, the NOAA and the Climate Prediction Center yesterday updated their March 30th through May 5th outlook, or April 5th outlook, continuing to see the risk of above average snows throughout the Great Basin, Four Corner States, and the Sierra Nevada, and also here in the upper Midwest. So this ongoing risk factor of spring melt causing flooding is going to just be with us for probably several more weeks. Speaking of flooding, look at today's all hazards weather map. We've now got flood watches from Oklahoma all the way to West Virginia, along the Ohio River, parts of the Missouri Valley, and the Mississippi Valley here. And while that colder air is diving into the west, we do see frost advisories, freeze watches out for parts of the Sacramento Valley here. And this next system that's going to be coming through here also has a high potential for making a lot of severe weather. This is today's severe storm risk. A lot of this is going to be quite late tonight. We're going to watch this area because there will be this stationary front that kind of sets up right in through this area on which we expect to see those stronger storms centered around the Red River Valley of the South, but getting into central Texas as well. And then the Storm Prediction Center did increase for tomorrow on Friday up to a moderate risk. This is kind of the 4 out of 5 on their ranking system for the lower Mississippi River Valley. And it's a tricky forecast. It's all going to depend on what the supercell development looks like out ahead of this. And then when the squall line does come through, what the potential for some straight line wind damage looks like along the lower Mississippi River Valley. But to the north of that, where I told you about the flood watch, let me just walk you through the next 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. You'll notice that coming out of Oklahoma through Arkansas, Missouri, southern Illinois, southern half of Indiana, Ohio, northern Kentucky, there's an area in here that's looking at 2 to 4 plus inches of rainfall on this stationary boundary. And you'll notice that north of that, there is the risk of some snow. Now, we're going to talk about the West and New England in a moment, but I do want you to know that right now through the next 72 hours, as this system kind of curls like this, that maybe eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, clipping parts of lower Michigan, getting into Ontario, a pretty high probability of getting a few inches of snow out of this. So this is the setup. This is right now. And what we've got is the stationary boundary on which this next system is going to ride. So there's that moisture opening up to the south. Now, I'm going to fast forward this. Let's get this out here to tomorrow. And this is the setup we're going to be looking at tomorrow midday. Let's get toward tomorrow evening. There we go. So what's happening at this point is you can already see the drier air advancing. You can see the main frontal boundary here sweeping out of eastern Texas into Louisiana, and there's the open moisture. But the low is going to be over parts of Missouri, meaning there's going to be plenty of colder air on the northern side. We step this up about a mile above. This is our low-level jet. This is what would be needed to create the wind shear to support the severe thunderstorms over the lower Mississippi River Valley. At 500 millibars, here's the highly amplified trough that's being fed by the subtropical ridge north of the Bahamas here. So this is it's a pretty classic setup for delivering the risk of severe weather to the south and maybe some snow to the north. So let's go to the high-res NAM and kind of get an idea on this. Early this morning, there is light snow spreading into this area, and there's still snow throughout much of the Rocky Mountains, but you're going to see that frontal boundary becoming established right here by this afternoon. So this is 2 o'clock this afternoon, getting into the evening hours, and the heavy rain begins. The storms start to build along that front in Oklahoma tonight, and then down into Texas. You can see here early, in the very early hours on Friday. Now the low begins to take shape as the trough digs through the Red River Valley of the South by Friday morning, getting into Friday midday, and that's when the next pulses of heavy rain kind of spread in through this area right in through here. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to watch out for the storms to pop down here in parts of eastern Texas and Louisiana, Arkansas. The main frontal boundary still sitting right in through this area by 5 o'clock tomorrow, and then that sweeps through Arkansas, eastern Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi Friday night. Now, as this storm system continues to add more rain here, I don't want to ignore the fact there's snow coming through the Rocky Mountains. There's snow in the Cascades, and there's quite a bit of colder air on the northern side of this. And the high-res NAM attempts to turn this over by early Saturday morning to snow right here on the Mississippi River between Illinois and Iowa, and then into southern Wisconsin. And that's going to be a very hard forecast right into that area to figure out how much snow is going to fall through this particular spot. You do see that through Saturday midday, we're going to watch out for some snow right here coming into parts of Nebraska and Kansas, and also Wyoming back up into Montana. All right, let's now look at the models that run out a bit longer, the GFS left, European right. So let's see how well they agree on that snow. So this is now overnight hours on Friday. Notice the Europeans making the conversion quicker than the GFS. So this is now getting into early morning Saturday. So this is overnight Friday into early morning Saturday. Better agreement in the models on where that snow could be. Heavier rains out to the east of it, as we've been discussing. And then you see that both models by Saturday, into Sunday, do have that snow like we talked about coming into this part of the plains. So let's let this system roll through Ontario and Quebec, move through New England. Very hard snowfall forecast for the interior of New England. GFS more aggressive than the European. It's just too much warm air to give you just a full-on snowstorm here with this. So it's going to be a lot of that 34 and rain action, which we hate. You'll notice the storms along the Gulf Coast on Sunday. And as we play out here into Monday morning, this is Monday midday, getting into Monday afternoon. A couple things I'm watching here. There is another storm system that's going to try to form in the eastern Corn Belt on Tuesday. See it right there? And then move into New England. Some of the models want to really pump some snow into this. We have no confidence right now on what this could look like. But I do want to point out that by next Wednesday, there's another deep coastal low rolling through the west. And that one could bring more snow to Oregon, Idaho. Also a lot of snow to the Sierra Nevada, into Nevada, and eventually gets over the Four Corners states. Now we're watching about a week from now for that system to run up into the midsection of the country. So this pattern isn't slowing down at all. So on the snow side of it, this is the probability of getting at least 3 inches of snow. Now, of course, we're expecting more in the central and northern Rockies, the Snake River Valley, especially the eastern side of it, and throughout Oregon, Nevada, and the Sierra Nevada. Some of the snowfall totals here will be quite large. I've linked that for you in today's report. I'm primarily using this map to notice where we could get the heavier snows right in through here and also into New England, okay? On the rainfall side of this is the probability of getting at least an inch of liquid in the next 10 days. Here's the probability of getting at least 2 inches, and here 4 inches. So we're identifying the west coast and then this corridor in through here as to being the wettest kind of locations. All right, from here, I want to talk about week 2, and I'm just going to give you 3 maps. I know they're kind of small on the screen here, but we're just looking at that day 8 through 14 pattern. And the models agree most on keeping this area wet into next week. Okay, there is the chance that we continue to stay wet along the west coast. GFS is not as aggressive as the European and the CPC, but it's just this is just a continuation of the pattern we've been seeing. And until I get a big ridge somewhere in the mid part of the country, I think this is going to continue into early April. Temperatures. In gray, everywhere we expect a frost in the next 7 days. Remember that we are still watching next weekend for some colder air to get back into the southeast. I'm going to have to wait to see how far to the south and east we can get that frost to go again. But if we look at the high temperatures, here's today's. Moving into Friday, again, right there is where that stationary boundary is parked. 80s in Raleigh, it's incredible. But look at the colder air that just stays anchored through the west. And there's Saturday getting into Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, a little bit of resurgence here, but this is just ahead of the next system. This will all cool back off again as we saw earlier in our multi-model forecast here. All right, our ensemble forecast. A couple last graphics. This is the forecast from March 30th to April the 5th on where we have the risk of being colder than normal. So you can see what's been outlined by the CPC, which means this pattern may take until we get past the first week or maybe 10 days of April to fully break away from this. And finally, just want to bring you up to speed on South America. Heavy rains yesterday into parts of Cordoba, Santa Fe, Entre Rios. This is north of Buenos Aires. Some places here picking up 3 to 4 inches of rain. They're still expected to have more in this area, but drier throughout much of Brazil. Not a major concern as of yet. We just need to watch to see if this pattern continues later on as we get into April and May. Could be a potential problem with safrinha crop. Not one right now, but could be a problem if it continues. So we'll watch it carefully. All right, talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.